Imagine living in a city where there are robots, corrupt politicians, and dangerous technology. Believe it or not, such a place exists, and it happens to be the subject of the movie we're here to talk about tonight. Hello everyone, and welcome. My name is John Turner, and I'm so pleased you've decided to join me. Over the years, storytellers have envisioned what cities from the future might look like, and this Japanese animated feature happens to be one such imagining. It has also recently achieved a new milestone. The film is known as Metropolis. No, it's not the Fritz Lang classic from the 1930s. It's this film, released in 2001. And now for the next hour, we invite you to learn more about this fascinating feature with tonight's panel, Metropolis, A Vision of the Future, turns 20. On the surface, Metropolis appears to be your typical bustling city, alive with activity, its streets populated with citizens, roaring traffic, businesses, swanky clubs, elaborate theaters, you name it. At the center of all this is a massive skyscraper, commissioned by a charismatic man named Duke Red, Metropolis's most powerful citizen.
I tremble at the honor of announcing the culmination of mankind's long history of intellectual and scientific achievement. Yesterday, our power spanned the earth. Today, it can illuminate the heavens. May it stand forever, our ziggurat!
Yet for all of its splendor and razzmatazz, Metropolis holds dark secrets of its own. For one thing, this city has 3 underground levels. 3 of them. Zone 1 is rather dreary and run down, and there is conflict brewing within the streets. Most of the service jobs in the city are performed by robots, and as such, many of the humans who are impoverished and out of work dwell in this region. Zone 2, on the other hand, is where the power plants are located, which handles the city's energy production. Zone 3, meanwhile, is sewage territory, where only robots work. Luckily, some of them, such as Fifi, are quite friendly. In the midst of all this hustle, crime is bound to happen in a vast city like Metropolis. And herein lies the plot for this tale. Japanese detective Shunsaku Ban and his young nephew, Kenichi, are on the trail of a notorious scientist known as Dr. Lawton. Their only help is a robot with a most unusual name.
My serial number's 803DRP-DM4973C.
Listen here, don't you have an easier name?
We're not allowed human names. It's considered inappropriate for a robot. They feel it would infringe upon the rights of humans.
I know all about that, but come on, numbers? Oh, I know. Starting now, your name is Pero.
Eventually, the detectives find Lawton's laboratory ablaze and the scientist mortally wounded. They also discover a mysterious girl named Tima, who isn't quite what she seems. In fact, as it turns out, she is a robot too. Dr. Lawton has been commissioned to program her for Duke Red. You see, she is modeled after the Duke's only daughter, who died years ago. And that's not even the half of it. The film also explores issues such as the misuse of technology, corruption, rebellion, twisted science, and philosophical questions, particularly about robots. Are these mechanical beings soulless weapons of destruction? Machines for service jobs? Or are they capable of emotions like love? There is also action, mystery, suspense, and a literally explosive climax. All of this is the culmination of 5 years' work, but it took an even longer time for this tale to reach the big screen. As intriguing as the movie is, the story behind its creation is of real interest. A pedigree of high-profile talent was involved with Metropolis, including the man who first conceived this story, a Japanese author, cartoonist, and animator known as Osamu Tezuka. Mr. Tezuka is considered by many animation fans to be the godfather of Japanese animation. And so tonight's panel also doubles as a history lesson about this legendary genius and his impact on the world of anime. Mr. Tezuka was born on November 3rd, 1928, in Toyonaka, Osaka, the eldest of 3 children. As a child, 2 different experiences with his parents helped shape his aesthetic style. His mother often took him to the Takarazuka Grand Theater, where an all-female musical theater troupe known as the Takarazuka Revue often performed. The company produced romantic musicals targeted at a female audience, which would prove to be a great influence on the artist's later works, right down to the costume designs. He was also inspired by the performers' large, sparkling eyes, which explains why a lot of his characters have similarly huge eyes. This style would eventually carry over to subsequent anime, giving it a very distinctive look. Still more inspiration came from his father showing him Disney animated features. As a boy, Tezuka became a huge fan of these movies, often watching them multiple times in a row, particularly Bambi, which he viewed more than 80 times. It was because of this exposure that Mr. Tezuka began to draw comics during his 2nd year in elementary school. But it wouldn't be until after World War II, at the age of 17, when he would publish his first series, The Diary of Ma-chan, in 1946. Eventually, Mr. Tezuka would create titles which would gain mainstream recognition with millions. Among them were Mighty Atom and Jungle Emperor. Overseas, both works are known as Astro Boy and Kimba the White Lion, respectively. But perhaps his most personal work is Phoenix, a set of stories set in different eras. This series, which was never finished, is available in English to read from the folks at Viz Media. In 1959, Tezuka was commissioned to work on an adaptation of one of his earliest works, Alakazam the Great. The film was produced at Toei Donga, which at the time was Japan's premier animation studio. But the experience proved to be a frustrating one, for he had little, if any, creative control over the production. Eventually, Tezuka would leave Toei and, 2 years later, establish a studio of his own, Mushi Productions. The new facility would produce the first Japanese animated television series ever, Astro Boy. It was a massive success, bringing a new style to Japanese animation that viewers would expect in the years to come. Characters with large, expressive faces, fast-paced action, and much more besides. Mr. Tezuka sadly passed away from stomach cancer on February 9th, 1989, at the age of 60. But his influence has never been forgotten. So where does Metropolis fit into all this? Well, it happens to have been one of Mr. Tezuka's earliest works, a 160-page graphic novel published in 1949. In fact, it was the second in a trilogy of science fiction epic graphic novels, which included Lost World and Next World. These works were among the first of their kind to include steampunk elements, which would eventually become mainstays in high-profile graphic novels and anime productions, particularly with shows such as Space Battleship Yamato, Future Boy Conan, and Rose of Versailles. Some animation fans have assumed that Mr. Tezuka's Metropolis was based on Fritz Lang's famous 1929 silent film classic of the same name. But, truth be told, Mr. Tezuka never actually saw the film in question. He was, however, inspired by a still image from Mr. Lang's movie. This is Maschinenmensch, which means machine human in German, one of the more memorable characters from the Fritz Lang movie. It was the image of this character which inspired Mr. Tezuka to fashion his story. When it comes to the other characters which propel Mr. Tezuka's tale, however, here's where things get complex. Some of these characters, like Duke Red and Superintendent Notarin, would make their first appearance in this story. But most of the other characters are from Osamu Tezuka's star system. This is a term that Mr. Tezuka has used to describe characters he has often reused in different productions and in various roles. For instance, 42-year-old detective Shunsaku Ban has appeared as a teacher to the title character in Astro Boy, as well as a kindly environmentalist in Jungle Emperor Leo. He is also nicknamed Higeoyaji, which means mustache old man. He has been referred to under many different names in numerous appearances, like Edgar Pompous and even Mustachio. Likewise, Shinsaku's nephew Kenichi has also been the leading role in several of Mr. Tezuka's works. In fact, he was one of the author's first major stars in several graphic novels, including New Treasure Island. Here are some other characters Mr. Tezuka has crafted, which also make appearances in this film. Why all these characters in various roles? Because Mr. Tezuka considered these characters stars in their own right. In fact, Mr. Tezuka has often joked about how much his characters were paid to portray certain roles. Imagine that! As challenging as it is to conceive a story like Metropolis to begin with, realizing it as an animated film is arguably even more so. For one thing, you need to commission a team of writers, artists, and animators to construct such a project. More crucially, you need an animation studio. Fortunately, one of Japan's most well-renowned studios was commissioned to provide Metropolis's spectacular visuals, MadHouse. The story of how this studio was founded is a pretty interesting one. In the early 1970s, Tezuka's own Mushi Productions found itself facing tough times. Plagued with financial difficulties, Mushi declared bankruptcy in 1973, and its assets were divided. Much of the animation staff who worked there would go on to form other studios. MadHouse, founded on October 17, 1972, was one of them. The company has gone on to produce more than 200 works for film, television, and home video.
Among their more prolific titles are Wicked City, Ninja Scroll, Perfect Bloom, Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust, Record of Lodoss War OVA, Trigun, and modern classics like The Girl Who Leapt Through Time and Oko's Inn.
All of this was because of 4 animators who defected from Mushi to fashion this brand new facility. One of them is the director of Metropolis, Mr. Shigeyuki Hayashi, better known by his pseudonym Rintaro. Born on January 22, 1941, Rintaro is one of Japan's renowned animation directors. He entered the industry at the age of 17 to work on the first Japanese animated feature to be released in color, Panda and the Magic Serpent, released by Toei in 1958. Later, he would join Tezuka's Mushi Productions, where his first directing job would be the 4th episode of Astro Boy. Rintaro has a lot of recollections of Mr. Tezuka, as he describes in this interview.
ただそれとは別に僕知ってる手塚さんっていうのはどっか非常にあれだけ大作家なんだけど新しいもの好きなとこあるわけですよ。世の中で劇画流行れば俺も劇画描けるぞっつってドロロみたいなのを描くわけですよ。そういう新しいもの好きの人だったんできっとメトロポリスはきっと企画通らなかったでしょ了解少なかったでしょうね。ただまあ僕は作ってる間はね枕元へたたれるのだけは嫌だなと思ってましたから。
Adapting Metropolis to animation did indeed prove to be a challenge, and one of them was dealing with Mr. Tezuka's opinions on the matter. Even though readers responded enthusiastically to Metropolis as a graphic novel, Mr. Tezuka later expressed he wasn't particularly proud of it. Perhaps this is just the nature of an artist being critical of his own work, particularly his earliest ones. But, whatever the reason, Mr. Tezuka came to look upon Metropolis with genuine regret, and it was because of this that he was very reluctant to have his work put to film, as Rintaro recollects.
いやーそれはねまずあれでしょうね許可されなかったまず間違いなく許可されなかったんだろうと思いますよ。まあいませんからね企画閉めたなと思ったぐらいですからいないですよ。本当まず許可下りなかったでしょうね。
As much as Tezuka kept on denying permission, Rintaro still had a lot of passion for wanting to set this story to animation, even if it meant having to wait until Mr. Tezuka passed away to do so.
で僕はやっぱりやりたかったのはもちろんその50年前の手塚治虫っていうのもあるんですしもう一つ僕はやっぱりこの時代に向かって通用するかな通用しないのかなっていうのは空想科学漫画つまりある意味では死後にもう近くなってるわけじゃないですか。むしろそれにとって変わってバーチャルリアリティと言われてる。でもなんとなく僕の中ではバーチャルリアリティと空想科学ってどっか背中合わせじゃないかと思ってるとこあるんですよ。だからもう一度っていうかとにかく通用するかどうかわからないけど手塚治虫の「メトロポリス」という作品を借りて空想科学漫画をアニメでちゃんと作ってみたい。でそれもしかもフルアニメに近いように枚数を使ってなんか表現してみたいなっていうのがまあ大体の大きな意図なんですけどね。
To help translate Tezuka's sprawling story to animation, Rintaro sought the services of one of Japan's most respected auteurs, graphic novel artist, screenwriter, and director Katsuhiro Otomo. Born on April 14th, 1954, Mr. Otomo's work has left an unmistakable impact on a generation of animation fans. His most popular work
is AKIRA, created first as a sprawling 6-volume graphic novel series and then as a landmark animated feature. Like Metropolis, AKIRA is a dark look into a dystopian futuristic city with a satirical and gritty edge. Its complicated storyline features many similarities to Mr. Tezuka's fantasy. Power-hungry politicians, dangerous technology, crime, rebellion, corruption, and a tangled mystery with a cautionary message. It's also a rather graphic tale, explosively so at that.
AKIRA was a huge success with animation fans and is today considered by many to be a classic. Based on all this, Mr. Otomo proved to be an ideal choice to provide the script for Metropolis.
自分にとってなんかすごく手塚治虫というその作家を新鮮に見れて面白く作れそうだなっていうふうに考えるとですね林さんの方からメトロポリスやらないかという話があった時にそれはいけるんじゃないかなと。それだと僕もすごいあんまり手垢がついた感じがしないので非常に、新しい作品になるんじゃないかなっていう。
When a novel is adapted from the page to the screen, there are bound to be differences from the source material, and Metropolis is no exception. For instance, in the graphic novel, the mysterious humanoid who catches Kenichi's eye is known as Michi, who has both the ability to fly and change her gender at any time. Yes, really!
In the film, however, the character, known as Tima, does not possess either ability. She is shown to be a female from the start and never flies. In both works, however, the character is coveted by Duke Red for sinister purposes that will not be revealed here for the sake of avoiding spoilers. Arguably the most significant difference from the graphic novel is the addition of a new character, Rock, who was another major player from the Tezuka star system. One of his earliest appearances is in another early work of Tezuka's, Detective Boy Rock Holmes. He has also been seen in episodes of Astro Boy and Phoenix. Depending on the story, Rock is portrayed as either a hero or a villain.
In this movie, Rock is a cold-blooded, ruthless juvenile who also leads a terrorist group known as the Mardukes. He is also Duke Red's adopted son and will go to any extreme to defend his foster father against anyone he considers a threat, notably robots. In many ways, Rock is the real villain of this movie and also happens to be its most compelling character, one that the audience is simultaneously fascinated and repulsed by.
Don't worry, I just want to take a closer look at what my father's so obsessed with. You don't mind, do you?
Another addition to the story is Atlas, a young rebel who attempts to overthrow Duke Red and provide the poorer communities of Metropolis the means to better their lives. Unfortunately, like Rock, he too carries a grudge against robots, and it is a primary motivator for his ill-fated actions.
Why must humanity always resort to violence as the only means of settling their differences?
There's no simple answer to that question. Yes, I agree that we're a violent race controlled by emotions. They're at war within us, and we can do nothing but move forward and search for peace through destruction. If we deny their existence, then we cannot survive, and without emotions, then we are nothing.
These are only some of the examples of differences from the book and the film. Anyone eager to learn more will be glad to know that the graphic novel of Metropolis was translated into English by the folks at Dark Horse Comics. It is unfortunately out of print, but worth checking out for a different, but no less enthralling, experience. The city of Metropolis is just as much of a character in this movie as its cast. Much of it comes down to the stunningly realized, richly detailed backgrounds and settings, from the tall skyscrapers, to the cable cars, to the buildings. In fact, the visuals are one of this movie's biggest assets. While most of the animation in this movie is done in the traditional hand-drawn style, computer graphics were employed in Metropolis to provide some of the more complex objects and shots. In the 1990s, there were animated features which experimented with mixing computer animation with traditional hand-drawn characters, notably the Disney classics Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Lion King. But Metropolis goes a step farther and uses numerous shots generated entirely by computers for many of its settings. This is especially evident for scenes which are set in the central plaza of Metropolis, whether we are sweeping past skyscrapers or exploring the depths of the ziggurat itself. For instance, take a look at this sequence. Notice the numerous objects here: hover cars, monorails, edges, crowds, all of which are rendered digitally. But just as it takes a lot of work to draw, animate, and trace a character frame by frame, it takes just as much time to realize a scene like this. To give you an idea, here's a comparison clip which shows the progress of putting together such a scene. tell, it's a very complicated process. But this is not the only sequence where such meticulous work was involved. There were also several scenes which combine hand-drawn animation and CG together, like this next shot. How do you put together a complex sequence like this? Here's the process.
First, the shot is storyboarded and laid out in terms of the positions of the characters. Next, the digital elements are created and rendered, from the backgrounds to the rotating gear. Then the animated characters, traced and painted onto cells, are photographed on camera against a white background. Finally, both elements are combined, and this is the result.
Fascinating, isn't it? Nowadays, animated films in America primarily use computers, but other countries have opted to use a mixture of computer technology and the classic hand-drawn style. For Rintaro, this sort of approach was especially important in the case of Metropolis.
今度デジタルという新しい道具が入ってきた時に即そっちへ行ってオール CG でっていう気は僕の中にはさらさらないんですよ。これやっぱり作り上げてきた基礎体力で40年近くで作り上げてきたものの不自由な部分をいかにそのデジタルという道具を取り込むことによって表現の幅を広げられるか。だからやっぱりそういう形でデジタルを道具として、つまり本来は鉛筆と消しゴムと絵筆とポスターカラーとその程度ですよね、道具ってのは。でそこにもう一つデジタルというマウスを使う道具を使ってあくまでもデジタルの方へ寄らないであくまでも通常今までやってきた僕らのアナログの世界にデジタルを強引に引きずり込んでいく。だからそこでは非常にもしたらデジタルという本来持ってる概念をねじ伏せてでもアニメに近づけるっていうそういう形があり得るんじゃないか。
Even with a compelling script and fabulous visuals, there are still certain elements that are needed to produce a feature like Metropolis, particularly sound. Music should play a significant role in any movie, animated or live action. In the case of Metropolis, its underscore is one of the many standouts. While there are plenty of dramatic, moody, beautiful cues provided by a full orchestra, most of the actual music in the film adopts a New Orleans jazz style, something that resembles the era of the Roaring Twenties. Japanese saxophone player Toshiyuki Honda is the composer of Metropolis's music. Born on April 9, 1957 in Tokyo, Mr. Honda has recorded numerous albums and provided scores for several Japanese features. Metropolis is his first work for animation. He provides the score with a catchy, toe-tapping theme, which also proves to be versatile. We first hear this swaying tune for the opening scene of Metropolis in pure jazz form. This theme is repeated multiple times throughout the film in different styles. For instance, there are times where it is treated in gentle, tender undertones, namely Tima and Kenichi's scenes. At other times, the theme also gets brooding, dramatic treatment by the full orchestra for sequences demanding such moods. Through each variation, the theme is as recognizable as it is poignant. As a bonus, for the closing credits, this theme is turned into a pop ballad of sorts called There Will Never Be Goodbye, with lyrics provided and sung by Minako Obata, nicknamed Mookie.
Burning orange light slowly melt into the sky. Sparkles in your eyes aglow.
A pair of vintage songs also make their way into Metropolis's soundtrack. The first is Joe Primrose's St. James Infirmary Blues. Now, this tune is no stranger to animation. In fact, it made an appearance in an old Betty Boop cartoon from 1933.
See, my baby there, she's dressed out on a long white table. She's so sweet, so cold, so fair.
In this film, the song is performed by Atsuki Kimura.
She was stretched out on long white table, so cold, so sweet, so fair.
In what may be the most daring choice imaginable, the climactic moments of the movie are set to Ray Charles's I Can't Stop Loving You. A rather bizarre selection, to be sure, yet somehow it turns out to be appropriate in its own twisted way. Another interesting bonus for Metropolis's musical score. One of the musicians in the band is director Rin Taro, who plays a bass clarinet. As you can tell, a lot of serious thought has been put into the creation of Metropolis's story, visuals, and music. But there's still one more piece of the puzzle that is required to complete a project as ambitious as this. In order for Metropolis to make any kind of impact with audiences, its script has to be performed by a cast of actors to breathe its characters to life. This process is handled differently on both sides of the globe. While American animated features tend to record the character voices first before beginning animation, in Japan, it's the other way around. Once the animation is finished, the actors are brought into the studio. The script is recorded like a radio drama, a technique that has been used for many Japanese animated productions. American voice acting for anime uses a similar process, but unlike the Japanese voiceovers, the actors have to be recorded separately for sound quality purposes. But there are other things that go along with this process as well, synchronizing words to mouth movements, or flaps, and being able to act, expressing emotion through your voice alone without using facial or body gestures. It's a challenging process for any voiceover, and if done clumsily, the results could be disastrous. Fortunately, Metropolis's dub was handled by a skillful voice director who has worked on similar projects with passion and sincere effort. Kevin Seymour has handled many English voiceover dubs for Japanese animation, from Ghost in the Shell, Across Plus, Perfect Blue, Armitage III, and the redubs for AKIRA and The Castle of Cagliostro. His dubs, produced at a now-defunct studio, Animes, has been highly acclaimed by many anime fans. Sadly, he is no longer with us. He died on February 6, 2014 at the age of 56, but his work remains fondly remembered by many. Metropolis's English cast features a host of names with experience in providing voiceovers for anime dubs. Some may sound familiar to you. Rebecca Forstad, who is fondly remembered by fans who grew up watching Robotech, speaks for Tima, giving this character a timid, childlike voice with raw vulnerability and, toward the end, judgmental authority.
I have to know, please. Am I a human of flesh and blood or not? This is punishment for toying with robots.
Brian Siddall, best known as Jim Hawken from Outlaw Star, is the voice of Kenichi.
Sadal is one of the few actresses who can convincingly portray a young boy's voice without sounding so obvious, to the point where you'd never know it was a woman.
I'm Keiichi. How do you do? Who are you?
Who are you?
No, listen. When you're talking about yourself, you say I. That's how it works. So, I am who?
Interestingly, this is a radically different choice from the Japanese version, which casts a more teenage-sounding voice for the role.
僕はケンイチ。よろしく。君は一体誰なんだ？
君は一体誰なんだ？
違うよ。いいかい？君は自分のことは私って言うんだ。私は誰？
The late Tony Pope has done a lot of voiceover work in his time. Shinsaku Ban was one of his last voice acting roles before his death. Fortunately, his is a very genial but still gruff performance, appropriate for this character.
Don't worry, you're safe. I taught that rock a lesson he won't soon forget. Did you hear that, Duke Red? The superhuman that you created is saying it doesn't need us anymore!
Veteran voiceover Jamieson Price provides Duke Red with a smooth, deep, and powerful voice, which exudes both absolute authority and villainy.
I made this for you, my dear. One day you will rule the entire world from this glorious throne. I put you in charge of security to prevent that kind of thing.
Yes, Father.
You idiot! I'm not your father, understand? I found you during the last war. You were an orphan, so I took you in.
One of the dub's standouts is a voice you might recognize. Scott Weinger, best known for his role as the title character in Disney's Aladdin, makes his first, and so far only, anime voice acting assignment as Atlas. Atlas may have a small part in the story, but it is a pleasant surprise to hear Scott in this film. And he didn't even need a genie to win this role.
What does ziggurat mean?
It's a kind of tower they used to build in the ancient city of Babylon to show everyone how powerful they were. The Tower of Babel is the most famous one of all, and everyone knows what happened to that. The king's arrogance angered the gods, and they smote him down, and it destroyed the tower. History repeats itself. The same thing will happen to Duke Red, his Mardukes, but this time it won't be the gods who will bring about the change. It'll be us.
Another standout is Digimon veteran Michael Rise, who effortlessly conveys Rock's contemptuously cruel, vengeful, and ruthless personality to a T. Perhaps it's unsurprising considering that, as mentioned, Rock is the most fascinating character in the story.
Don't give me any trouble. Just give me what I want. If you hand over the girl, no questions asked, then I'll let you go home alive.
Don't make promises you can't keep, Rock! I know you better than that!
How can he think a little puppet like you is a superhuman?
There has been never-ending debate among fans on whether Japanese animation should be experienced in its native language track or dubbed in a language viewers can understand. The answer, ultimately, is a matter of preference. Although there have been some cases where dubs have fallen short, Metropolis isn't one of them. Considering the credentials of its director and its cast, it is certainly a fine way to experience the film, as is the Japanese language track. In the end, both have their merits. After 5 years of work and a budget of 1 billion yen, roughly $15 million, Metropolis premiered in Japanese theaters on May 26, 2001. Critics and audiences responded favorably to the film's technical merits and complex story. But that same year, Metropolis faced stiff competition from other movies, particularly Hayao Miyazaki's Spirited Away, which would conquer the box office shortly after being released that summer. And unfortunately for Metropolis, it was unable to recuperate its budget theatrically.
It has, however, acquired cult status on DVD, particularly in America. Sony Picture Studios gave Metropolis a brief theatrical showing in the US on January 11, 2002, before bringing it to DVD several months later. Although it has never quite achieved the same recognition as other well-known contenders of adult animation, Metropolis is still fondly remembered by a legion of animation fans. It's difficult to know for sure how Mr. Tezuka would respond to Rintaro's adaptation of a work he wasn't particularly proud of, but it was a labor of love for everyone involved. As mentioned earlier, Metropolis has also achieved a new milestone. It has turned 20 this year, and what better time to celebrate this occasion than providing a panel like this? Lots of people tend to believe that animation is really nothing but fodder for kids. But ambitious productions like Metropolis disprove that notion. Aside from being a thrilling mystery and imaginative depiction of a world that might be, it's a work of art as well. One that I would highly recommend checking out. As mentioned, it's a fascinating film. And so we've come to the end of our celebration of this extraordinary movie. I hope you found it enjoyable and interesting, and that I've encouraged you to check it out if you haven't already done so. There are a few more panels I have planned for the remainder of this year, and they'll premiere right here on Virtual Panel Theater. Keep your eye open for them. Also, I hope to present several of these panels in person at a convention someday, especially now that they are finally starting again. Until then, however, this is John Turner saying, thanks for watching, everyone. Stay healthy, and goodbye for now. See you next time.